Hey, what's going on, guys? Jason Frausto for TennisUnleashed.net. Today I'm doing a complete forehand technique analysis on Jannik Sinner's forehand. We know he has one of the spinniest and biggest forehands on the ATP Tour. The question is, are the key technical elements that make up Sinner's forehand completely unique to Jannik, or did some of those key technical elements that allow for more power and more spin get copied from a player that came on tour well before Sinner got out there? If you want to know the answer to that question, stay tuned. It's coming up next. So one thing that's really important to understand as well is there's early footage of Sinner when he was 13 years old, 17 years old, where you can see he didn't have the same forehand technique that he has now on tour. So we know over the course of time that Jannik's forehand technique morphed on purpose into what it is today, that unique forehand with so much spin and so much power. And the player that I think really inspired his forehand technique, at least some of the really critical elements that allow for more spin and power, is Jack Sock. So right now we're gonna take a close look side by side at Sock and Sinner from the side view, and then we'll also take a close look at their forehands from the back view so you can see some of the elements that were inspired by Sock on the Sinner forehand. Before I break this down, let's let it play once just in real time. All right, so let's go ahead and let's break this down now. We're going to look at the forehand side by side, Sock on the left, Sinner on the right. First things that we notice here just in the early stages, forehands actually look very, very similar. One big difference between both of these guys, Sock has a full Western grip on his forehand side here. You can also see Sock's pinky actually on his forehand kind of dangling off the racket handle there. Just to me, Sock's forehand was like a completely natural forehand at some point in his development, and something he just did on his own. That's how he ended up with this forehand. And a lot of times innovation happens, right? When you just let people play and just kind of do their own thing with very little guidance. Sometimes that's how the biggest shots in tennis are developed. So Sinner here looking very similar to Sock, minus the forehand grip position. Everything else looks very similar. As we go forward here, the really key and kind of interesting element is going to be the fact that both of these guys have the tip of the racket well in front of their hitting hand right here. Again, looks very similar, except for Sock's left hand is offhand. He's up on the strings, again, very natural, where most guys are trained to hold the left hand on the throat of the racket like this, like we see with Sinner, until they get through a good chunk of their unit turn. And then just moving forward from here, here's one of the big common elements between them kind of takes place. You can see Sinner keeps the tip of his racket head in front of his hitting hand, which is difficult to do. I don't think it's natural for a lot of people at this stage of the swing to keep the tip of the racket in front of the hand, but it allows for a little bit more elasticity, a little bit more of that whip effect. But look at Sock over here. The tip is well in front of his hitting hand at this stage of the swing. We talked about the difference in a Western grip for Sock, how he holds the racket, versus more of a semi-Western grip for Sinner here. And then also one of the big differences at this stage though, Sock has more of a relaxed wrist in this position. Sinner's wrist is actually still cocked up a little bit at this stage of the swing with that tip inverted. That could just simply be a function of a Western grip versus a semi-Western grip, or just again, a more relaxed arm in this position for Sock than Sinner. The big interesting thing is Sinner maintains that inverted tip kind of here, right? But then he loses it right about here. And when Sinner actually loses that, we can see Sock, and I know it's tough to see in this frame, he's still in that position where the tip of his racket is still well in front of his hitting hand. And to me, that signals that his racket is actually going to whip through faster and have more racket head speed than Sinner's does. So that inverted tip right here is a common element between the two. I believe Sinner's team copied that directly from the Sock forehand. But then after that, Sock maintains that even to this position right here, which is pretty incredible because his arm is pretty much fully extended at this point, but the tip of the racket is still well in front of his hand. So he has incredible leg on the forehand. From here, we see both guys come through, right? That racket gets into a quote-unquote slotted position, which is a really old technical term. But from here, everything actually looks extremely similar at this point. But just look at the amount of whip for Sock with the racket head. Watch that thing fling back, and I'm slowing everything down. And then at contact right here, a lot of similarities. Elbow in front of the body for good leverage and good power on the forehand side. You can see that with both guys here. And then again, the legs here, the right leg in particular has extended and come up. Both guys come off the ground a little bit, Sinner more on that right side, then Sock on the left. With that in mind, let's move on to the back view and take a look at some of the similarities and keys on the back view. And before we break it down, let's let it play twice just in real time here. Sock on the left, Sinner on the right. All right, so let's go ahead and break this down now from the back view. You got Sock on the left here, Sinner over here on the right. Couple interesting things, right? Elbow position, very similar from here. Got a little gap between the elbow, usually 1 to 2 tennis balls, give or take, is usually appropriate. And then from here, we can see Sinner gets into that tip forward position. Sock is here, and he's going to get into it a little bit later. So we talked about the tip of that racket being in front of the hitting hand. That's definitely something similar between both guys at the late stage of the backswing. But what's interesting is Sock and Sinner are going to hit the ball here at the exact same time, but Sock's racket has to be moving faster because he doesn't get into the same positions that Sinner does until later in the swing. So the second big key, though, for Sinner is really this racket off to the side like this. The racket is completely sideways. The strings are pointed to the back fence. Sock, you'll see here in a second, does something extremely similar. It's very, very similar, which makes me think again that Sinner's team copied these two elements of the Sock forehand, particularly the second one here with the racket pointed sideways. The reason this is such an important thing is the tip of the racket right here, I call it tip flip. The tip of the racket here for Sinner is going to come from this position. It's going to end up all the way back here, and then it's going to come forward and contact the ball, right? At the same time that Sock's does. When your racket has to travel from this further position here, get to here, and then still go here, that distance is really, really long. So if all other things are equal, if you're making contact at the same time as somebody else, but your racket's coming all the way from here, and their forehand racket might be coming, from the typical pat the dog position, let's say here, because your racket is traveling the further distance as Sinner's is here than the person that would start from here, that means your racket has to be moving faster into contact, which means more spin and more power. And that's ultimately what everybody is looking for, right? Is that ultimate power. But if we look at these two guys here, they don't look that similar at this point. But watch this. Look at Jack get into that exact same position, basically, as Sinner. We talked about the difference in the full Western grip versus a semi-Western grip and the relaxed wrist position here versus a little bit more of a cocked up / relaxed position from Sinner here. It's definitely a different wrist position. But Sock accomplishes this very similar position. Tip of the racket out here. It's going to end up over here, and it's going to come up to contact here. The distance to contact is a really long path, but the racket is moving at Mach 5. In fact, it's an easy argument from this position that Sock's racket is going to move faster than Sinner's because we can see where Sock's racket is right now compared to Sinner's, and we know they're going to hit the ball at the exact same time. So let's watch Jack's racket come from here, right? Very similar again to Jannik here. He just does it a little bit later because we know his racket is moving a little bit faster than Sinner's is. And watch this from here. Sock is still way over here, and Sinner is already here with his racket, a shorter distance to the ball than Sock. But watch Sock's racket. Look at that. Wow, that's crazy. Just look at how quickly. It's a handful of frames. It moves all the way to here. The tip flip, to me, between the two guys, between these two guys is actually pretty similar distance here, okay? But Sock is still here while Sinner is here at this stage of the swing, which means Jack has unbelievable racket head speed because we know Sinner does as well. And then both guys contact the ball here. Very similar positions at contact. On this particular forehand, Sock is a little bit closer to his body with his elbow than Sinner is. That can be a function, too, of that Western grip. Contacts do tend to be a little closer to the body with a Western versus a semi, so that could be affecting that. Otherwise, this looks very similar here. A lot of spin with a lot of power, and then they're going to finish and wipe through there. But again, the two big critical elements that I think Team Sinner copied from Jack Sock's forehand: tip in front of the racket hand for a long period of time, trying to create more leg, more elasticity, and then the very clear racket in this kind of sideways position. Very similar for Sock here. Strings aren't quite pointed back at the fence, but I have seen, again, other clips of Sock where those strings are pancaked back towards the fence. I think Sinner is purposely cocking his wrist into this position because Sock has the more extreme grip and his racket's not always going into that position. So Sinner is purposely cocking the wrist like this a little bit to get a little bit more flip and a little bit more whip into the ball. But again, I think those are the two big key elements that Sinner's team copied from Jack Sock's forehand, and it's paid off with some big dividends. All right, guys, that wraps it up for this forehand technique video between Jannik Sinner and Jack Sock. It seems very clear that Sinner's team implemented some very key technical elements of Sock's forehand into Jannik Sinner's forehand technique, and it's paid huge dividends for Jannik. If you found this video helpful or you feel like you learned something today, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. I'm Jason Frausto for TennisUnleashed.net. I'll see you next time.